Okay, everyone. So now we need to get into some very technical stuff, and so I'm going to use the magnifier to really look at the details. But that means I'm not going to be able to point at things necessarily. So just keep that in mind while we're looking at stuff. So I'm going to start this magnifier. All right, and I'm going up to the top where it says composition settings because I want to magnify this. So what we have here are a lot of settings to do with how video works. And you can see first up we have, this preset says HDV and then width and height and then something about lock aspect ratio. So 16:9, that aspect ratio, is a standard widescreen television. It's also your standard movie. So it's 16 units across by 9 units up, otherwise known as a ratio of 1.78, which is 16 divided by 9. So that's the shape, right? If it was 4:3, that would be your old-timey square television. If it was super wide, it would be, I don't know, 2.3 something to 1. It's a much different number. So that's the shape of the screen. The numbers 1280 by 720 are the number of pixels across and the number of pixels down. So that's how much resolution you have. So these two things are interrelated, but they're not exactly the same. Now, that 1280 by 720 is your standard small television or your standard cheap big television. Your standard big television that isn't 4K would be 1920 by 1080. Your computer monitors are completely different. They're off the charts. It's a whole different thing. You can click this to get a lot of different, like a lot of different presets. But we're sticking with this one because it's the one that we had from the video. You'll also see this pixel aspect ratio. I kid you not all pixels are square. The ones you deal with probably will be because they're on computers, but a lot of video equipment used to have unsquare pixels, so that was a thing we had to deal with. Frame rate is how many frames per second. So back in ye olde days of film, there was actual film that ran through an actual projector or an actual camera, and this is referring to how many pictures per second were getting put there. Now, contrary to the term motion picture, there is no motion involved in movies or anything you will do here. It's all fake. It's a series of still images that blink on and off. And because of persistence of vision, we don't see the blanks. We don't see the black space. And because of some other psychological phenomenon, we presume there to be motion. But if aliens come down to Earth, they're going to ask us what all the weird blinky pictures are, because without our physiology and our psychology, it doesn't work, which is crazy. And then, so these settings, resolution, time code, this is the composition setting. So I told you before I set it to half. That's a display thing. That's not what it's actually going to be when it renders. You see here it says 900 kilobytes per frame. So what's happening is that it's letting you know how big of an image it's rendering in real time. So for those of you that really want to get into video, you can kind of see, maybe what the limit is on your machine. Start time code, it's probably always going to be 0 for you guys. Duration, starting backwards. Frames, seconds, minutes, hours. The number of frames that can be in this last number depends on how many frames per second you're at. So if you're at 25 frames per second, it can reach 24 before adding another second to the other thing. If you're at 30 frames per second, it's going to get to 29 before adding a frame to the seconds. When you're typing numbers in here, do not say, oh, I only want I don't want any frames, so I'm going to leave it blank. Or if you want 2 seconds instead of 1 second, don't type in 2, type in 0, 2. You have to keep this time code of a number, colon, 2 numbers, colon, 2 numbers, colon, 2 numbers. If you don't do that, it will get very angry at you. Okay, so those are your composition settings, but they'll have to relate to video. And I'm going to slowly make our way up here. When you click on video, you get all of those same things. So you've got a resolution, which is, oh, that's composition. So we actually want, oh, my bad. Okay. So we want anything else. There we go. So you've got resolution, and then the parentheses, this pixel aspect ratio. You've got the amount of time, so 15 seconds, 16 frames. The frame rate, which is 2997, that's okay, 30 frames a second. But back in ye olde days, televisions would actually drop 0.03 frames every second. It's kind of like the leap year of video. And so they had to make the time code drop a frame every so often, which is crazy. Millions of colors is just the amount of colors, and that's the compression, photo JPEG. If I go to a different one, okay, so different resolution. Also, different aspect ratio for the pixels, 30 frames per second, so no drop frame. Still millions of colors. Different compression, H.264. We shall get to that in a minute. And then there's sound information. So those of you that work with sound will recognize 44.1 and 32-bit and stereo and these kinds of things. If you have still artwork, there's significantly less information that is necessary to get that across because it's still. So whenever you add time to something, here you go, things change dramatically. Okay, so I'm going to turn off that crazy thing for a minute and get into rendering. So let's say you've like put together your wonderful video and it's great and you're done and you want it to render. You don't really render directly from After Effects. You should go, for all of these programs, File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. So that is a separate program that links in with all of the other video related programs or audio related programs. So Premiere, After Effects, Audition, I'm trying to think if there's any others. It also is a standalone. It's kind of like Adobe's Handbrake for those of you. So if you have videos that already exist and they don't need rendering, you just need them to be re-encoded to be smaller, to be a different codec, to be whatever it is you need it to be. That's how this works. And what it's going to do is it's going to add it to the queue, which is this thing over here. All right. And it's set up as a queue because you want to add multiple things and then press the go button and then like go get dinner or something because rendering is boring and takes up all of your computer resources. So don't be doing anything else on your computer while you're rendering. Real quick, go back to here for a second. You saw that there was a couple of different movies and some of them said .mp4 and then some of them said .mov. And that's the kind of thing that's also going to show up here when you're naming it, right? So I would click this and it's name dot extension, in this case mp4, and that's the only selection I have. That's because the type of compression I'm using will only allow an mp4 container. So .mp4, .avi, .mov, these are the containers that hold the video. Think of it like you can have a glass of water, but you can have it in a glass that's made of glass, or a glass that's made of plastic, or one that's made of metal. Those are all different containers, and it's still water in there, right? What's going on here is that this particular thing, H.264, requires an MP4 container. So you would click on, again, right on the blue, and you say, I want it saved here, and you can call it whatever you want. And then I can click on this word, and it's going to take a minute to bring up this. This is like where most of your settings are. So what's going on here, it's asking you, do you want audio, do you want video? I don't want audio. And then format, H.264. H.264 is what most of you will use. It's a good YouTube compression. It's a good, like, I need the file to not be very big but still look good compression. Your standard Blu-rays and DVDs are in MPEG. Even people that digitize their files, H.264. There's a lot though. You have to be careful though because AVI is going to be a very big file type. QuickTime is quickly going out of style. It's not going to be in use anymore. H.264 is fairly universal, and it means a lower amount of time to upload to YouTube because it doesn't have to be processed. It does also mean that there's not a lot of settings. You can go to bitrate settings, and if you really get into stuff, there might be a constant bitrate or 2 passes or higher. You can move these numbers up if you want the quality to be higher. And I hit OK. And I don't believe, yeah, that brings you to the exact same thing. If you had different settings here, it might bring you somewhere different. I'm not going to press render because I'm recording my screen and that's going to drive it nuts. But you would press play and it would show you your progress down here. And so you can watch the progress, although keep in mind if it's displaying the progress, it's displaying the video and that can use up some processing power. But that's going to tell you how long it's going to take. And video takes some time. It takes some time to render. Um, so be aware of that. I'm going to close that because we don't need to open anymore. All right, so keep in mind when you're working on this, you should really make sure you would have saved before you go to render. One thing about rendering, if you are rendering a video, it has to get to the end of the video and then compile the whole thing into a proper file. If you get halfway through your render and something crashes, you have nothing. That's why I keep, being like, oh, I hope this like doesn't crash my screen recorder because it's the same thing. I get to the all the way to the end of the video sometimes and then something crashes and it freezes and I get nothing and I have to re-record the video. So if you are rendering a straight video, then you will have to consider that. If you are not rendering something with sound, you could do an image sequence, in which case, and then put it together later in Premiere because you're adding it to something else. An image sequence will get halfway through the images and then you just start it back up at that point. So something to keep in mind. But there are all your very technical details about video and what's going on here.